Hello and welcome to another episode of Fulham Fan News. In today's episode, we are delighted to be joined by the Evening Standard's very own football reporter, Dom Smith. How are you doing, mate?
Very well. Thanks for having me on.
No worries at all. And also with us today is Fulham Fan News regular Joe Gunning. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, it's good to be back. My last cameo was slightly embarrassing myself on the Arsenal reaction, which seemed to be picked up by the comments. But no, I'm sober today. I stick to water today.
It's great to hear. It's great to hear. But we'll be discussing a range of things from contracts to the season ahead today. And it's good to have Dom along with us. To kick us off, Dom, I'd love to know your thoughts on Fulham's business this summer. What do you make of our signings?
I think most of them are sensible signings, but I feel like I did expect more players to come through the door. It's difficult with transfer windows. You say more bodies, more players. It makes players sound like kind of numbers, but the fact of the matter is Fulham lost 8 players at the end of last summer. 3 players returned to their parent clubs at the end of the loan, and 5 players left. 5 if you include Gazaniga, which not every Fulham fan has done. But that means that you need to replace them. And I think that Fulham have done a decent job in replacing them as best as they could. But I think you can see that Marco Silva's frustrated that more players haven't come in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely not been the transfer window we all expected with the number of bodies coming in, but we've certainly strengthened in some areas, and I think we have got a real strong squad ahead of the season. Joe, what are your thoughts on our summer window?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at it through rose-tinted glasses, really. I think if you look at individual positions, if you look at defence, I think we've vastly improved our defence, getting in Castagna and Ballo-Touré. Obviously, me personally, I don't know anything about Ballo-Touré, but on paper, it looks like we've significantly improved our defence. Midfield, I'm personally very happy with Alex Iwobi. I think that he's going to prove a lot this season, prove a lot for Fulham. Obviously, the huge gap is Mitrovic, and the big question is whether Jimenez will be able to kind of replicate the sort of numbers that Mitrovic has consistently put up for Fulham, and we'll get into that later on. But I think I'm trying to look at it with a more positive note, and pressers came out the other week with Marco Silva saying that he's happy with Jimenez and wasn't searching for a new striker. And for me, as long as Marco Silva's happy and it looks like he's going to sign a new contract, if I'm not saying it does, but as the happier he is, the happier I am. I'm trying to look at it in a positive view at the moment.
Yeah, that's fair. I think all Fulham fans would be, especially myself. I personally, I mean, we'll get onto Marco's contract a little bit later, but I think most of our signings will make the impact that we want them to, and we'll hopefully see some results in the coming games. Dom, I'm interested to know what player stands out for you, which we've signed this window.
It's a good question. I think Adama Traore is on paper more exciting than Alex Iwobi, but I think it might be Iwobi who proves himself a better buy, or a better signing at least for Fulham. I think Iwobi is one of those players who's got a lot to prove, and maybe kind of some pent up frustration after a few years at Everton, which I feel is a club in decline, and where there's a lot of players at Everton at the moment who I feel have got a lot to give, but they just, for whatever reason, they're unable to give it in an Everton shirt. That's why I also think that Brentford, which is another club which I cover, Brentford's signing of Mopé on loan might well end up to be quite a good signing, I think. I feel like that's another player who Everton have had and maybe haven't seen the best of. So I think Iwobi stands out to me as a sensible signing, but there are others. And I think that Bassi as well is an impressive signing as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's some good choices there. Joe, who would be your standout player?
I'd agree. I'd couple up Iwobi and Bassi. I think Bassi, when he did start against Hoffenheim, I thought he looked fantastic, albeit that's a pre-season game and players aren't exactly giving their all. But I'm a little bit surprised that Bassi's not played a more major part in the team beginning of the season. But Iwobi, I'm a huge fan of. I remember when we played Everton, he was playing for the first half down the end where us away fans were sitting. And I remember nudging the person next to me and saying, God, Iwobi looks like a real threat, doesn't he? And I mean, if you're making Kenny Tete look out of position and stuff like that, then you have to be good. So I'm really happy that we've signed him. As Dom mentioned, Adama Traore as well. He's had a few cameos off the bench that have looked really good. I feel like it looks like he's kind of like for what Dan James was last season, a player we can bring on from the bench, that can inject pace into our side. But I feel like Adama will be a lot more effective than Dan James was. So a couple there that I think will have a real impact on our side.
Yeah, both very fair assessments. And as you say, Adama Traore is a standout there. He's a proper Marco Silva signing. He's someone that Marco wanted, definitely believes in. Of course, Marco has got a contract which he hasn't yet extended, with the option to extend at the end of the season. Many fans are calling for it to happen already, and many are losing belief that he will sign already. Dom, I'll start with you. Do you think Marco will sign an extension at the end of the season?
I think it's a pretty even thing from yes to no at the moment. I think it's pretty level. But I do think that Marco Silva has been frustrated. He's cut a frustrated figure as Fulham manager for quite a long time now. I mean, you just saw the way that he reacted in his press conference at the end of the Man City game when a journalist asked him whether he'd been booked, I believe, and he said, I mean, I wasn't at that match, but I think he said, I'm being told I'm being booked even in games that I've not been booked now, and he just has this kind of fiery temper. I mean, all of us journalists who cover Fulham say that, but he's very likable because he gives long answers, and you can see that he's really committed to the cause, and I feel like he's had the sort of impact he's had early on at Fulham, he's only really ever had in English football at Hull before, where he was a good manager. I don't think it necessarily worked out for him hugely well at Watford or at Everton. So it's difficult to tell, but I think at the moment he's committed. But I think if results start to drop, he will link that to the lack of signings, because remember he was saying he wanted 5 players in the last 7 days of the window, and that didn't quite happen. There were other names who came in, but not quite 5. I think he'd couple all of these things together in the end, and maybe he would walk away, but we don't know yet.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I do think the way the season goes will be a massive direction pointer to whether he signs on or not. I personally think that if we're looking on form and we're likely to stay up this season, because I think that would be another massive achievement in itself, considering many newly promoted teams do struggle in their second season back in the top flight. I think if we manage to stay up, I think that will be a huge boost to Marco signing on. But if we are struggling near the bottom and we do, whether we go down or not, I think Marco could not sign his an extension. So I guess, as you say, it's on the balance between yes and no. Joe, what are your thoughts?
I think first of all, I think Marco Silva's made it clear that what he wants more than anything in his managerial career is to manage in the Premier League. I think he loves the Premier League. He said when he got sacked from the Everton job, he sat there and just watched Premier League game after Premier League game. So I think it's clear that he wants to manage in the Premier League, which is made more obvious by the fact he rejected a 40 million or so offer from Saudi Arabia. So I think it will come down to what his options are come the end of the season. And right now, we don't know which clubs will be managerless and which clubs will have stable managers come the end. If come the end of the season, there's a Spurs or a Chelsea without a manager looking for a manager, I think he would be quite high on their radars. And you have to think, why wouldn't he go to a club like that where they'll throw money at him, they'll back the signings that he wants? Why would he stay at Fulham where he makes it so clear that I want to sign this player, I want to sign this player, and it just never seems to come to anything? I think we will have another good season, and I think we'll be safe from relegation. Lots of people are very worried about our attacking output, and I think that's a fair point. But I think that we will still be safe. I think that there's a bit of a lack of quality in the Premier League this season that wasn't so apparent last season. So I think it's very dependent on just which jobs are available come the end of the season. And I guess we have to hope that we are the most appealing option for him to renew a contract, because I don't think we're going to see him stray from the Premier League. I think he made that clear with rejecting the Saudi money. So yeah, for me, it's very dependent on how other clubs are at the end of the season.
I think he would maybe consider. Sorry, I think he would maybe consider leaving the Premier League if it was a really large European club that came in for him. But I think the fortunate thing there for Fulham is that I'm not so sure that a managerless Bayern Munich or Borussia Dortmund or Atletico Madrid or someone like that would necessarily have Marco Silva on their radar. And I personally think wrongly, but I suspect that they wouldn't have him on their radar. And so that might be the Premier League's gain, certainly, but probably Fulham's gain as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you there. You've raised some pretty good points on the matter, and I think it only time will tell. Of course, Fulham are mid-table and we're sitting on 4 points with plenty of teams picking up and dropping form around us, which of course 4 points in term isn't bad considering considering the teams around us and the results we've had so far. What are your thoughts on the Fulham team so far? What are your thoughts on Fulham's start to the season, Dom?
Yeah, it's been okay. I think the most important result from Fulham's perspective, more important than their ridiculous defeat to Brentford, which was a really poor result, was the win at Fulham. The win at Everton, because it suggests that their attacking output, which is something that Joe mentioned just recently. Without Mitrovic now, their attacking output can still be effective through other means. And it was certainly the case in the second half of last season that Fulham's wingers and their attacking midfielders had to come into it when Mitrovic was, well, not just when he was out with his suspension, but also when he was out with kind of bad form. He was in the team, but he wasn't scoring, and other players had to come into it. And I think that is going to be really important for Fulham going forward, is whether there can be other players stepping up to the mark and providing goal contributions, because I don't think Raul Jimenez is going to hit 20 goals this season. I think that's a fair assumption, and so I would say it's been a decent start, but obviously not comparable to last season, which got off fantastically for Fulham. So
yeah, definitely agree with you there. Joe, what are your thoughts?
So technically, my thing where I want to look at it positively, I always try and be optimistic, is that technically points wise, we're doing better this season than we were last season. At least I know that was the case for last week. I actually don't know if that's true anymore after the Man City game. But I think based on the fixtures we've had, we beat Everton, and my favourite thing about that Everton game was that although we didn't deserve to win, we still won. And that's what you see the top sides consistently do. Even when they're not the better side and they don't completely show up, they still have the quality to win games. And I think that's what really sets the top sides from the rest in English football. And the fact that we did that, I remember leaving and saying to people like, okay, sure, we didn't play the best, but we won. And that's all that matters. Getting a point away at Arsenal with 10 men, of course, also fantastic. Man City, like you said as well, Dom, Brentford, I don't really want to touch on that, especially when I'm trying to be optimistic, because I mean, there's no real excuses that can be cut from that game. It was just awful. I guess Paulinho wasn't present. And to be honest, I don't think against a single side we get packed in if Paulinho's playing. Man City, I'd like to straight away point at the officiating and point at that goal that was disallowed. But to be honest, bias aside, I don't think, I've seen lots of people saying like, oh, it's a very different game if you go in 1-1, and I agree, but I still think we lose that game like it is Man City away. But now we look forward, and I mean, we've got Luton next, and that is realistically, even at this stage of the season, a must win, because most teams are going to go to Luton and get 3 points. I think now is when we really need to dig our heels in and show that we're not here to play around yet again this season. And I think so far we've proved that a little bit, but we still need to prove ourselves a little bit more.
Yeah, that's fair. Dom, I'm interested to know your thoughts on the Man City game. What were your thoughts on that controversial decision that went City's way?
I don't think that the player is directly in the goalkeeper's eye line, but it's irrelevant, because he in either going to flick the ball or moving his foot away from the ball, and no one can definitively know, apart from the player himself, which one it was. He has interacted with play. I mean, clearly he's interacted with play because he's moved his foot either towards the ball or away from the ball in a way that suggests he's going to touch the ball. And if you're the goalkeeper, the last thing you want as you're mid dive is for another player to touch the ball. So Yeah, it's you called it controversial. The real controversy of the matter is that it wasn't controversial. What made it controversial was the ridiculous refereeing decision that followed.
Of course, the refereeing wasn't brilliant, but we'll move on. And as Joe said, we've got plenty of favourable fixtures coming up, with Luton being one of them. What do you expect to see from Fulham going forward? Dom, I'll start with you.
I think the fixtures start to come thick and fast now. Fulham are still in the EFL Cup after knocking out Tottenham. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it goes from here. I still feel like patience is needed from Fulham fans in terms of how long it takes for these new signings to bed in. I don't think a huge number of them will be starters each week. Actually, I think quite a lot of the team will be the basis that Fulham had so well last season. The 11 that they had last season, predominantly Mitrovic, of course, and others. That isn't the case for. But I think, I certainly think how Fulham fans look at the future, there needs to be a level of like giving these players reasonable time to bed into a team, because it's always new, and a lot of these players have come from foreign leagues. They haven't played in the Premier League before. Not the case for some, but certainly the case for others. So cautious optimism, I would say.
Yeah, that's a fair. Joe, of course, we're in the middle of the international break. So do you think the international break will help Fulham kind of go back, compose, come back from the international break and push on after the City defeats? And of course, Palhinha has been rumoured to return to the team after the international break.
I think last season, I remember there was an international break, and then we came back and played really well. And that one kind of came at a perfect time, where we'd found a little bit of bad form and we came back really well. I really like our fixtures that we've got in the next few weeks. I've seen quite a lot of tweets like, oh, how many points do we think we can get? And I think lots of people are kind of going below what we should be aiming for. I think Luton we should obviously be aiming for 3 points. We've got Sheffield United in there soon. We should be aiming for 3. Chelsea, hey, why not? Let's aim for 3 at Chelsea as well. They're a really poor side at the moment. I think that we should be trying to get 3 points at a side like Chelsea with the form that they're in at the moment. And sure, maybe that's my bias speaking, and I'll always back Fulham over other teams. I always try and look at things with optimism. But I do think that the international break has come at a good time, especially with a little bit of potential unrest in the squad. I think one thing that we always prided ourselves on, and players always mentioned, is that there's such a togetherness in the club. And now that the Palhinha things happen, the Mitrovic thing did happen. I mean, these things don't not cause ripple effect to the other players on the squad. Willian, there were reports of him wanting to leave. It looked like Vinicius was going to leave, and then that broke down. And these Portuguese players, they're kind of a core group in our squad. I mean, we see them all joking around together, and you have to wonder what the impact of them wanting to leave has on these other players. I mean, if players aren't fully playing for the badge, then their teammates are going to see this and their mentalities may be affected. So I do think that the international break has come at a perfect time for our players to kind of get their feet back on the ground, get their heads back into it and focus on what we need to do, which is still solidifying our position in the Premier League.
Absolutely. It's going to be important to push on with the next lot of fixtures for sure. Just focusing back onto players a moment. One of our many signings was Raul JIMENEZ, who during his time at Wolves did find tremendous form, and he was a real threat in front of goal against any sort of team, including the likes of Man City. Dom, do you think JIMENEZ can find his feet again under Marco Silva and reignite his form of the past?
Well, I mean, since his terrible injury, he's never really been the same player since. And that's why he was available for £5 million this summer. Spending £5 million on a player who, on paper at least, has produced, as you say, scintillating football, ridiculous statistics for a striker, is good business. The problem is those years of his career are quite far in the past now. So it really is a bit of an unknown signing. I feel like a lot of Fulham signings really are unknown signings. It's difficult to know what they're going to get out of Iwobi, out of Adama Traore. We've already said that, but certainly JIMENEZ is one who a lot is held out in terms of hope for him. But I still feel like when it was approaching the exit for Mitrovic, obviously by then JIMENEZ had signed, and then after Mitrovic had left, Marco Silva was still talking about signing a new striker, almost as if he could get a player who was better than Jimenez, Jimenez would be resigned to number 2, and that player would go straight in. So I think that Marco Silva trusts Jimenez, but I don't think, when Marco Silva goes to bed at night and he's being completely honest with himself, I don't know if he sees Jimenez as someone who's going to be breaking goal scoring records, or even, and maybe that's not what's asked of a striker, but even the next best thing, which is scoring a lot of goals. I'm not sure he's even going to be back necessarily to score a lot of goals. The hope is that he will, and also potentially more likely than that is that he is important in hold-up play and in bringing his teammates into play and putting wingers through, and that is something he's very good at. So yeah, it's an interesting one to see how that pans out across the season. I don't think his return will be particularly impressive in terms of goals. The question is, there are two questions. Can Fulham sign another striker in January? And can Jimenez prove that he's more than just hold up play and get a number of goals which is sufficient to Fulham having what they deem a successful season?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there with that one. Of course, these questions will eventually be answered, but one thing's for certain, and that's that Raul Jimenez is not the direct Mitrovic replacement and is simply another attacking option. But as you say, he provides a lot more to the team than just the goals. Joe, you're a massive advocate for Raul Jimenez. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to go with the optimism first and say that Marco Silva, we know, is a great manager. And he's proved that he can get players playing back at their best. I mean, you look at players like Willian, whose career looked like it had fallen off, but saw some sort of resurgence when he came playing under Marco Silva. Players like Andreas. So we know Marco can do that. And if he can even get Jimenez playing to near what he was playing like before, I mean, he was a player that was linked to clubs like Barcelona. He was kind of the best of the rest striker in the league. However, me personally, you say I'm a huge advocate for Jimenez, but I feel like I'm on the opposite side of the fence, to be honest. I don't see it really. I have made it clear how much I love Carlos Vinicius, and I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of Carlos Vinicius this season. I think it took him so long to find his groove last season, and then he found it and it looked like he was scoring. And perhaps Marco knows that the same thing's going to happen with Jimenez, except his potential is going to be above what Vinicius could reach. But I have been a little bit disappointed so far. I guess against City, the goal, although scored by Tim Ream, was inadvertently created by Raul Jimenez. And I do think, like Dom says, it's very important for the style Marco wants to play that we have a striker who can drop deep and bring in the other attacking players. And I do think that's one of Jimenez's strengths. You see how good he is in the air. I mean, a stat got released about how many aerial duels he won in one of the game weeks, and it was like the most in the league. So I think that is a positive. However, just the lack of attacking output in terms of goals, the fact he scored not one single goal last season is really uninspiring to me. And I personally, I don't want to be mean, but I hope he isn't the Mitrovic replacement. I think that we need someone, especially considering we got over 50 million for Mitrovic. I really hope that there's a bigger name coming in the door. If not in January, I think that we'll be fine going the season without a huge name striker. But just put some time into it. Find someone that will properly be the man who can take this club, score us goals, even better than what Mitrovic did. But to be honest, I don't think Jimenez is that man. But I'm very happy to be proven wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll have plenty of time in January and next summer to invest, as you say, with the money that we've got. So as we've said, only time will tell. Just to finish with Dom, where do you reckon Fulham will finish this season?
Oh, that's a question where the answer is just inevitably going to be wrong, isn't it? So this will haunt me. But let's go. Let's go 15th.
I think that's fair.
I could see 14th. Let's go 15th though. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd agree and say that I think we will be a bit lower than last season based on the players we have, but of course we will stay up again and push on for another consecutive Premier League season. Joe, what are you thinking?
Well, first, I just want to say, Kieran, where's your optimism gone? I remember when we did our prediction video, and you were the one who was. I think you said that we'd finish even higher than we did.
And my optimism's declined a little bit, but we stay optimistic as we can.
Yeah, I think personally around the same. I remember before the season started, I said 13th, and I think kind of around the same. I think, like I said earlier, there's a real lack of quality in the league this season compared to last season. I think last season was probably the strongest the Premier League has ever been, and I think this season is a lot weaker comparably. So I do think that definitely will be fine, but I think it will be very close between those clubs, kind of 10th to 16th or 17th or whatever. I think it'll be a real battle. So it depends where we can pick up points, how scrappy we are, stuff like that. But yeah, I'd say I think we'll be safe, and that's the main thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's an exciting season, and there's still a long way to go. So we'll have to see where it goes. But Dom, it's been a pleasure speaking to you tonight.
Thank you very much for having me on, guys. I've really
no worries
it.
at all. Of course, I'll remind you all that we do have a partnership with Foco UK, so do see the link in the description if you're interested in any merch and stuff. But yeah, thanks for speaking with me, gents, and come on, you Whites.